Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life.
In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a scream pierces the night, and a man lies dead. A letter opener in his chest, a priceless manuscript vanished. Who among the elegant guests, each hiding a secret, wields the hand of a killer? A black glove, a cryptic note, a whiff of lavender. Clues that whisper betrayal. Can Hercule Poirot's little grey cells unravel a web of lies before the murderer strikes again? Step into a mystery where trust is a trap and the truth is deadly. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm at Blackthorn Manor Inn. The waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Somerset turned to fiery hues and the air carried a crisp foreboding, Blackthorn Manor stood as a monument to elegance and secrecy. Nestled in a secluded valley, its ivy-clad walls and towering gables loomed over the surrounding countryside, a proud relic of Edwardian grandeur. The manor belonged to Sir Reginald Haverford, a retired diplomat whose wealth and reputation drew a curious assortment of guests to his annual autumn gathering. This year, however, the gathering promised more than polite conversation and claret. It carried the weight of unspoken grudges and hidden ambitions. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, found himself invited to Blackthorn Manor under curious circumstances. Sir Reginald, a distant acquaintance from Hastings' military days, had penned a letter insisting on his presence, hinting at a matter of some delicacy that required discretion. Hastings, intrigued and flattered, accepted, unaware that this invitation would entangle him in a web of deceit far beyond his imagining. The evening of October 12th, 1925, saw the manor's grand dining hall alight with the glow of crystal chandeliers. The table, set with gleaming silver and fine porcelain, hosted a party of 10, each figure a study in contrasts. Sir Reginald at the head was a man of 60, his silver hair and sharp blue eyes commanding attention. His wife, Lady Evelyn Haverford, a fragile beauty of 45, wore a sapphire necklace that caught the candlelight. Her smile strained as she glanced at her husband. Their son, Charles Haverford, a brooding young man of 28, sat with a glass of whisky, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Beside him was his fiancée, Miss Clara Beaumont, a radiant actress whose laughter seemed to charm all but Charles himself. To Clara's left sat Dr. Malcolm Reed, a local physician with a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, his face betraying a quiet unease. Across from him was Mrs. Violet Langley, a widowed cousin of Sir Reginald, her sharp tongue and sharper eyes missing nothing. Next to her was Mr. Ernest Whitmore, a solicitor from London, whose fastidious manner and thin moustache suggested a man accustomed to secrets. Miss Daphne Sinclair, a young heiress and friend of Clara's, giggled nervously, her youth at odds with the tension in the room. Colonel Rupert Blake, a retired military man with a ruddy complexion, spoke loudly of his hunting exploits, while his wife, Mrs. Beatrice Blake, sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The meal progressed with the usual pleasantries, discussions of the harvest, the weather and London's latest scandals. But beneath the civility, Hastings sensed a current of unease. Sir Reginald's toast, delivered with a forced joviality, did little to dispel it. To old friends and new beginnings, he declared, raising his glass, Hastings noticed that Charles barely touched his drink, and Lady Evelyn's hand trembled as she lifted hers. As the clock struck 9, the conversation turned to Sir Reginald's recent acquisition, a rare manuscript, a medieval text said to be worth a fortune. "It is locked in my study," he announced, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "A treasure, but one that requires careful handling." His words drew curious glances, particularly from Mr. Whitmore, whose fingers tightened around his fork. The evening took a darker turn when, just as dessert was served, a piercing scream echoed from the upper floors. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock. Sir Reginald stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "That came from the west wing," he said, his voice tight. Without another word, he strode from the room, followed by Charles, Dr. Reed, and Hastings, who felt a familiar thrill of foreboding. They reached the west wing to find Mrs. Agnes Poole, the housekeeper, standing outside Sir Reginald's study, her face pale as moonlight. "It's locked," she stammered, pointing to the heavy oak door. "I heard a noise, a thud, and then nothing." Sir Reginald produced a key, but before he could turn it, Dr. Reed pushed forward, his medical instincts taking over. "Allow me," he said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. The door swung open to reveal a scene of chaos. The study, a haven of leather-bound books and polished mahogany, was in disarray. Papers littered the floor, a chair lay overturned, and the safe, where the manuscript was kept, stood ajar, its contents missing. But it was not the manuscript that drew their gasps. Slumped over the desk, his face contorted in a grimace of pain, was Sir Reginald's valet, Mr. Thomas Grayson. A letter opener, its handle gleaming silver, protruded from his chest, and a pool of blood stained the blotter beneath him. Dr. Reed knelt beside the body, his fingers searching for a pulse. "He's dead," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stabbed not more than an hour ago." Hastings glanced at his watch. It was 9:15 p.m. The guests now gathered at the door murmured in horror. Lady Evelyn clutched her necklace, her eyes wide with fear, while Charles stared at the body, his face unreadable. "Who was in this wing?" Sir Reginald demanded, his voice sharp. Mrs. Poole shook her head, insisting she had seen no one. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each aware that the murderer was likely among them. Hastings, his mind racing, noted the details. The open window, the muddy footprint on the carpet, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. He knew one thing for certain. This was no random act. Someone in Blackthorn Manor had planned this crime with chilling precision. As the local police were summoned, Hastings found himself thinking of his old friend, Hercule Poirot. The Belgian detective, with his meticulous habits and uncanny insight, would see through the shadows of this tragedy. Hastings resolved to send for him at once, knowing that only Poirot could unravel the secrets hidden within these walls. The manor, once a place of warmth and hospitality, now felt like a gilded cage. The guests retired to their rooms, their faces etched with suspicion. Hastings lingered in the hall, his gaze falling on the grand staircase, where a single glove, black, finely made, lay discarded on the bottom step. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was small, likely a woman's, and bore the faint monogram C.B. Clara Beaumont, or another clue entirely? As he stood there, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Blackthorn Manor was no longer a haven. It was a stage for a deadly game, and Hastings knew that the truth, like the manuscript, was hidden just out of reach. He penned a telegram to Poirot, his words urgent. "Come at once. Murder at Blackthorn Manor. Your little grey cells needed." Psst! Night stretched on, heavy with silence and secrets, as the manor waited for the arrival of the one man who could pierce its mysteries. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Crime. The morning after the murder at Blackthorn Manor dawned grey and oppressive, the Somerset sky heavy with the threat of rain. The grandeur of the manor seemed diminished, its polished floors and ornate ceilings overshadowed by the grim reality of Mr. Thomas Grayson's death. The guests summoned to the drawing-room by a stern-faced Inspector Morris of the local constabulary sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting from one to another, as if searching for the mark of guilt. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt the weight of the previous night's events pressing upon him. The black glove with the monogram C.B. rested in his pocket, a silent question he had yet to answer. Inspector Morris, a burly man with a bristling moustache and a no-nonsense air, stood at the centre of the room, his notebook open. Mr. Grayson was stabbed at approximately 8:30 p.m., he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The letter opener was taken from Sir Reginald's desk, and the safe containing the manuscript was forced open. "We are dealing with a deliberate act, not a robbery gone wrong. I'll need statements from everyone present." Hastings observed the reactions. Lady Evelyn, pale and clutching a lace handkerchief, seemed on the verge of collapse. Charles Haverford, her son, stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Clara Beaumont, his fiancée, sat with a studied composure, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though Hastings noted her fingers twitched slightly. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, while Mrs. Violet Langley's sharp eyes followed the inspector's every move. Mr. Ernest Whitmore, the solicitor, cleared his throat as if preparing to argue a case, and Miss Daphne Sinclair, the young heiress, looked as though she might burst into tears. Colonel Blake puffed out his chest, muttering about damned cowardly business, while his wife, Beatrice, remained silent, her gaze fixed on the window. The inspector's questions were thorough, but predictable, focusing on alibis and movements between 8 walls and 9:15 p.m. Sir Reginald confirmed he had been in the dining room, as had most of the guests, save for brief absences. Clara had excused herself at 8:15 to freshen up, returning just before the scream. Charles had stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette at 8:20, rejoining the party moments later. Dr. Reed admitted to visiting the library to fetch a book, though he insisted he was back by 8:30. Mrs. Langley claimed she had remained at the table, a statement corroborated by Colonel Blake, who had been regaling her with tales of his hunting days. Whitmore and Daphne both said they had stayed in the dining room, though Daphne's nervous fidgeting suggested otherwise. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, had been in the kitchen, supervising the staff, until she heard the scream. Hastings listened intently, his mind cataloguing inconsistencies. The timeline was tight. Grayson had been alive at Atemcourt. Dish, when Mrs. Poole saw him crossing the hall, yet dead by 8:30. The open window in the study suggested an outsider, but the muddy footprint, On the carpet was too small for a man's boot, and the lavender scent lingered in Hastings' memory. He longed for Poirot's presence, knowing his friend's sharp mind would seize upon these details with relish. As the inspector droned on, a sharp rap at the front door interrupted the proceedings. Mrs. Poole hurried to answer it, returning, moments later, with a small, impeccably dressed figure, whose waxed moustache and polished shoes announced his identity before he spoke. "Mon ami Hastings!" exclaimed Hercule Poirot, his green eyes twinkling with curiosity as he surveyed the room. "You summon me to a scene of tragedy, and I find myself intrigued already." Sir Reginald stepped forward, his face a mixture of relief and agitation. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. This is a dreadful business. My valet Grayson murdered in my study, and a priceless manuscript stolen. I beg you to assist us." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression one of serene confidence. "Monsieur, it is the work of Hercule Poirot to bring order to chaos. I shall require a full account of the events, and I shall examine this study of yours. But first," he turned to the gathered guests, his gaze piercing, "I must observe, the truth, mes amis, lies not only in what is said, but in what is not said." The room seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. Hastings, relieved to see his friend, handed him the black glove. "I found this on the staircase last night," he murmured. Poirot examined it, his fingers tracing the monogram, C.B. "Most interesting," he said softly, tucking it into his pocket. "A clue, perhaps, or a distraction. We shall see." Inspector Morris, clearly irritated by Poirot's arrival, allowed him to accompany the police to the study. The room remained as it had been the previous night. Papers strewn across the floor, the overturned chair, the open safe. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his small frame bending to inspect the muddy footprint, the window latch, and the desk where Grayson had died. "The letter opener," he mused. "It is a weapon of opportunity, n'est-ce pas? Yet the safe was forced with precision. This suggests a plan, not a moment of passion." He paused at the window, noting the absence of mud on the sill. The footprint is inside, yet the window is open. Curious. He sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing. Lavender, faint but distinct, a perfume perhaps. Hastings nodded, recalling the scent from the previous night. Poirot's attention turned to the safe, its lock mangled but intact. The manuscript was the target, or so it seems. Yet Grayson, he is dead. Why? Was he a witness, an accomplice, or something else entirely? He turned to Inspector Morris. "The body, it has been examined?" Morris nodded. Dr. Reed confirmed death by stabbing, no other wounds. Grayson was in good health, no signs of a struggle. "No struggle," Poirot repeated, his voice thoughtful. "A man stabbed in the chest, yet he does not fight. He knew his attacker, perhaps, or was taken by surprise." He knelt by the desk, examining a small scrap of paper tucked beneath, the blotter. It bore a single word, written in a hurried scrawl: "Trust." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. A message or a mistake? We shall see. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot began his interviews, his manner polite but relentless. He started with Lady Evelyn, whose composure faltered under his gaze. "I was in the dining-room all evening," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I saw nothing, heard nothing until the scream." Poirot nodded, his eyes noting the faint flush on her cheeks. Charles Haverford was next, his answers curt. "I was on the terrace, smoking. I didn't see Grayson or anyone else." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, monsieur, your cigarette case was found in the study near the safe. How do you explain this?" Charles paled, stammering, I must have left it earlier." Clara Beaumont, when questioned, smiled charmingly. "I was in my room adjusting my dress. I returned just before the scream." Poirot's eyes lingered on her. "And your glove, mademoiselle?" "One was found on the staircase with your initials." Clara's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "I must have dropped it. I own several pairs." Each guest faced Poirot's scrutiny, their alibis tested by his gentle but incisive questions. Dr. Reed admitted to a brief visit to the study earlier in the day, to borrow a book, he claimed. Mrs. Langley denied leaving the dining room, her tone defiant. Whitmore, the solicitor, spoke of a professional disagreement with Grayson over Sir Reginald's affairs, but insisted it was minor. Daphne Sinclair, tearful, claimed she had seen nothing, though her eyes darted toward Charles. Colonel Blake blustered about the outrage, while Beatrice remained silent, her hands still clasped tightly. As the interviews concluded, Poirot retreated to a corner with Hastings. "The pieces, they begin to form a picture, mon ami. The glove, the cigarette, case, the word trust, these are not accidents. Someone wishes us to look one way, while the truth lies elsewhere." He tapped his temple. "The little grey cells, they are at work." Outside, the rain began to fall, sealing Blackthorn Manor in a shroud of mist. Hastings felt a chill, knowing that the murderer was among them, watching, waiting. Poirot, however, seemed almost cheerful, his confidence unshaken. "The game has begun, Hastings," he said softly, "and Hercule Poirot does not lose." Chapter 3. The Arrival of Hercule Poirot. The rain that had begun as a drizzle now lashed against the windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting a veil of gloom over the estate. By mid-morning on October 13, 1925, the atmosphere inside was as heavy as the storm outside, each guest weighed down by the knowledge that a murderer walked among them. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the drawing-room's hearth, felt the tension like a physical force, his thoughts returning to the grim discovery of Thomas Grayson's body and the tantalizing clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, that hinted at a deeper truth. Hercule Poirot's arrival, however, brought a spark of hope, his presence a beacon of order in the chaos of suspicion. Poirot, having concluded his initial interviews, now stood at the centre of the drawing-room, his small frame commanding attention, despite the grandeur of his surroundings. His neatly waxed moustache gleamed under the chandelier's light, and his green eyes scanned the assembled guests with a calm intensity that made even the boldest among them shift uncomfortably. Inspector Morris, relegated to the sidelines, watched with barely concealed irritation, his notebook clutched tightly as Poirot took charge. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and precise, "a crime has been committed, a life taken, and a treasure stolen. But fear not, for Hercule Poirot is here to restore order. I shall require your cooperation, your honesty, and above all, your patience. The truth, it hides, but it cannot hide from me." His words, delivered with a quiet confidence, seemed to settle the room. though Hastings noted the flicker of unease in Clara Beaumont's eyes and the rigid set of Charles Haverford's jaw. Poirot's first act was to request a tour of the manor, insisting on seeing every room that might hold a clue. Sir Reginald, still shaken but eager to assist, led the way, with Hastings and Inspector Morris trailing behind. The group moved through the oak-panelled halls, past portraits of stern-faced Haverfords, to the west wing where the murder had occurred. Poirot paused at the grand staircase, his gaze lingering on the spot where Hastings had found the glove. "This staircase," he mused. "It is a crossroads, n'est-ce pas? Many pass through, yet few notice what they leave behind." Theaton, study, Poirot resumed his examination with meticulous care. The room remained as it had been: the overturned chair, the scattered papers, the open safe. He knelt by the muddy footprint, measuring it with a small tape he produced from his pocket. "A woman's shoe, size 6 perhaps," he murmured. "But the mud, it is dry now, and the rain only began last night. This suggests the footprint was made before the storm." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "Before the murder, then?" Poirot nodded. "Or staged to appear so." He moved to the desk, where the blood-stained blotter still bore the grim outline of Grayson's body. The scrap of paper with the word trust intrigued him most. "This word," he said, holding it to the light. "It is written in haste, yet deliberately. Was it Grayson's final act, or a plant by the killer?" Inspector Morris scoffed. "Sounds like a dying message to me. Common enough in these cases." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Common, perhaps, but never simple, Inspector." The open window drew his attention next. He examined the latch, noting its stiffness. To open this window requires effort, yet it was found ajar. Why? To suggest an outsider, yet the footprint is inside and the sill is clean. He sniffed the air again, his nostrils flaring. The lavender, it is stronger here. A perfume, most certainly, but whose? Leaving the study, Poirot requested to see Grayson's quarters. The valet's room, tucked away in the servants' wing, was Spartan but orderly, reflecting a man of disciplined habits. A small desk held a few personal items: a photograph of a young woman, a worn Bible, and a ledger. Poirot flipped through the ledger, his eyes narrowing at a series of entries, sums of money, dates, and cryptic initials. Grayson was more than a valet, he said softly. He kept secrets, perhaps, for others. Next, they visited the rooms of the guests, Poirot's polite insistence overriding their protests. Clara Beaumont's room revealed a wardrobe of elegant gowns and a bottle of lavender perfume, which Poirot noted with interest. "Mademoiselle, you favour this scent?" he asked. Clara nodded, her smile tight. "It's quite common, monsieur." "Poirot!" He inclined his head, saying nothing. Charles Haverford's room was less revealing, save for a half-empty bottle of whisky and a locked drawer, which Poirot did not press to open. Lady Evelyn's quarters were a study in luxury, but a crumpled letter in her wastebasket caught Poirot's eye. He retrieved it discreetly, reading a few lines before tucking it away. Dr. Reed's room contained medical texts and a locked case, which he claimed held his instruments. Mrs. Langley's room was austere, with a single photograph of a young man. Her late son, perhaps. The others' rooms yielded little, though Poirot's keen eyes missed nothing. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot gathered the guests once more. "I have seen much, and yet the puzzle is incomplete," he said. "Let us consider the alibis. Monsieur Charles, you were on the terrace at 8:20, yes? Yet your cigarette case was in the study. Mademoiselle Clara, you were absent for 15 minutes, and a glove bearing your initials was found. Dr. Reed, you visited the library, yet the study is nearby. Each of you, mes amis, has a piece of the truth. Who will share it first? Dusnit." The room bristled with tension. Charles flushed, his hands clenching. "I told you, I left the case earlier. I wasn't in the study." Clara's laugh was brittle. "Anyone could have dropped a glove, Monsieur Poirot. Mine are not unique." Dr. Reed adjusted his spectacles, his voice unsteady. "I had no reason to harm Grayson. I barely knew him." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "The truth, it is like a mosaic. Each piece seems insignificant, yet together they form a picture. I ask only that you reflect. Someone in this room knows more than they say." He paused, letting his words settle. Hastings, watching, saw Mrs. Langley's lips tighten and Daphne Sinclair's hands tremble. As the day wore on, Poirot retreated to a quiet corner with Hastings, his expression thoughtful. "The manuscript, mon ami, it is the key, but not in the way we think. Grayson's death is no accident. It is tied to the secrets of this house. The glove, the perfume, the word trust, they point to a plan, one woven with care." Hijai tapped his temple. "The little grey cells, they begin to see." Inspector Morris, meanwhile, pursued a more conventional line, focusing on the missing manuscript. He interrogated the staff, suspecting a disgruntled servant, but Mrs. Poole and the maids swore they had seen no strangers. The inspector's theory that an outsider had entered through the window seemed increasingly unlikely under Poirot's scrutiny. That afternoon, a new discovery shifted the investigation. Mrs. Poole, cleaning the study, found a small key hidden beneath a rug. Poirot examined it, noting its size and shape. "This fits a drawer, perhaps, or a box. Not the safe, but something personal." He glanced at Hastings. "We must find what this unlocks." As evening approached, the manor's isolation grew more oppressive, the storm cutting off all communication with the outside world. Hastings felt a pang of unease, sensing that the murderer was watching, waiting for Poirot to falter. But Poirot, sipping a tisane prepared by Mrs. Poole, seemed unruffled. "Patience, Hastings," he said. "The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they do not know Hercule Poirot." The day ended with a quiet dinner, the guests subdued, their conversation strained. Poirot, seated at the table, observed them all, his eyes missing nothing. Hastings, glancing at his friend, saw a spark of determination. The game, as Poirot had called it, was far from over, and Blackthorn Manor held secrets yet to be unveiled. Chapter 4. The Questions Deepen. The rain continued its relentless assault on Blackthorn Manor, turning the Somerset grounds into a quagmire, and deepening the sense of entrapment within its walls. By the afternoon of October 13, 1925, the air inside was thick with suspicion, each guest acutely aware that Hercule Poirot's probing mind was circling closer to the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with a cup of lukewarm tea, watched his friend pace before the fire, his small hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. The murder of Thomas Grayson and the theft of the priceless manuscript had transformed the manor into a stage for deception, and Poirot was determined to unmask the players. The morning had been spent in further examination of the study, but Poirot now turned his attention to the guests themselves, insisting on private interviews to clarify the little details. Inspector Morris, relegated to organising the staff's statements, grumbled about foreign meddling, but Sir Reginald, desperate for answers, granted Poirot full authority. The Belgian detective, with his characteristic blend of charm and relentlessness, began his interrogations in the morning room, a cosy space with velvet curtains and a view of the rain-soaked gardens. First was Lady Evelyn Haverford, whose fragile composure seemed to fray under Poirot's gaze. She sat primly, her sapphire necklace glinting, but her hands betrayed her nerves, twisting the lace handkerchief until it was nearly in shreds. "Madame," Poirot began, his tone gentle but unyielding, "you were in the dining-room all evening, yet you seemed distressed even before the scream. Was there something troubling you?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, and she hesitated before replying. "It was merely the strain of hosting, Monsieur Poirot. Nothing more." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching slightly. "And yet, madame, I found a letter in your wastebasket, addressed to you with the words, 'You must act soon.' Who wrote it, and what action was required?" Lady Evelyn paled, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a personal matter, from a friend. It has no bearing on this tragedy." Poirot nodded, but his eyes held hers, and Hastings, observing, knew his friend had noted her evasion. Next came Charles Haverford, whose brooding demeanour had only deepened since the murder. He slouched in his chair, his dark eyes defiant. "Monsieur Charles," Poirot said, "your cigarette case was found in the study, near the safe. You claim to have left it earlier, but when? And why were you in the study at all?" Charles's jaw tightened. "I was there in the afternoon, discussing estate matters with father. I must have dropped it then." Poirot's smile was polite, but sceptical. And yet the case was clean, no dust, no smudges, as if placed recently. Curious, non? Charles muttered a curse under his breath, insisting he knew nothing of Grayson's death. Clara Beaumont followed, her actress's poise intact but strained. Poirot held up the black glove, its CB monogram stark against the dark fabric. "Mademoiselle, you say this glove is yours, yet you dropped it on the staircase. At what time and why were you there?" Clara's laugh was light, but her eyes flickered. "I told you I went to my room to freshen up. I must have dropped it on my way back. It's a common enough item." Poirot's gaze lingered on the bottle of lavender perfume on the table, brought from her room. "And this scent, mademoiselle, it matches the air in the study. You were there, perhaps?" Clara's smile faltered. "Many women use lavender, monsieur. It proves nothing." Dr. Malcolm Reed was next, his nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles more pronounced. Poirot questioned his visit to the library, so close to the study. "Doctor, you were in the West Wing at 8:15, yes? Did you see Grayson or anyone else?" Reed shook his head, his voice unsteady. "I was in the library, fetching a medical journal. I saw no one." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet, doctor, your medical case was locked. What do you keep inside that you guard so carefully?" Reed flushed. "My instruments, nothing more. I'm a cautious man." Poirot's silence was more probing than any question. Mrs. Violet Langley, the sharp-tongued widow, faced Poirot with a defiance that bordered on contempt. "I was at the dining table, as I said. I saw nothing, heard nothing until the scream." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Madam, you are observant, non? You notice much about this household. Did you notice Grayson's behaviour in the days before his death?" Mrs. Langley hesitated, then said, "He was secretive, always whispering with someone. Charles, I think, or perhaps Whitmore." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. Mr. Ernest Whitmore, the solicitor, was composed but guarded. Poirot questioned his disagreement with Grayson over Sir Reginald's affairs. "It was a minor matter," Whitmore said smoothly. "A question of investments, nothing to do with murder." Poirot's smile was thin. "And yet, monsieur, you were seen leaving the West Wing at 8:10 by a maid. You did not mention this." Whitmore's composure cracked slightly. "I was looking for a quiet place to read. I returned to the dining room shortly after. Miss Daphne Sinclair, the young heiress, was a bundle of nerves, her eyes red from crying. I stayed in the dining room," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I didn't know Grayson well." Poirot's tone softened. "Mademoiselle, you looked often at Monsieur Charles last night. Is there something you wish to share?" Daphne's hands twisted in her lap. "He's my friend's fiancé. I was just concerned." Poirot noted her hesitation, but did not press. Colonel Blake blustered through his interview, claiming he had been entertaining Mrs. Langley with stories, and saw nothing amiss. His wife, Beatrice, spoke barely a word, confirming only that she had remained at the table. Poirot's questions to her were gentle, but her silence intrigued him. "Madam, you observe much, yet say little. Why?" Beatrice's lips parted, but she only whispered, "I have nothing to add." The interviews concluded, Poirot retreated to the library with Hastings, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Each one, mon ami, tells a story, but not the whole story. The glove, the perfume, the cigarette case, these are threads in a tapestry of deceit." He produced the small key found under the rug. "This, I believe, unlocks a secret. We must find its lock." Hastings frowned. "Do you think the manuscript was the motive, or was Grayson the target?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Both, perhaps, or neither. The manuscript is a distraction, I suspect. Grayson knew something worth killing for." He tapped the ledger from Grayson's room, its cryptic entries still undeciphered. "This holds answers, but we need the key, literal and figurative." As evening approached, Poirot requested a timeline of the guests' movements, meticulously charting their alibis on a sheet of paper. Hastings watched, marvelling at his friend's precision. The timeline revealed gaps. Clara's 15-minute absence, Charles's brief time on the terrace, Reed's library visit, Whitmore's unaccounted moments. Each gap was a window for murder, yet none aligned perfectly with the 8:30 Mick was stabbing. A new discovery emerged when Mrs. Poole, tidying the servants' hall, found a torn scrap of fabric caught on a splintered doorframe. It was silk, deep blue, and matched the gown Clara had worn the previous night. Poirot examined it, his expression unreadable. Another clue, or another misdirection, he murmured. He instructed Mrs. Poole to keep the find secret, knowing the murderer might grow careless if they believed themselves safe. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, the guests avoiding each other's eyes. Poirot, seated beside Sir Reginald, spoke little but observed everything. Hastings noticed Clara's hand tremble as she reached for her glass, and Charles's gaze linger on his fiancée with something like suspicion. Lady Evelyn excused herself early, claiming a headache, while Mrs. Langley whispered sharply to Whitmore, who nodded curtly. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his voice cutting through the silence. "Mes amis, the truth draws near. Tomorrow I shall ask more questions, and I advise you to consider your answers carefully." His words hung in the air, a challenge and a warning. Hastings, watching the guests disperse, felt a chill. The murderer was close, and Poirot's net was tightening. But the manor's secrets remained stubbornly out of reach. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. Multiply, the storm that battered Blackthorn Manor showed no signs of abating. On the evening of October 13th, 1925, its relentless drumming against the windows, a grim underscore to the mounting tension within. The murder of Thomas Grayson and the theft of Sir Reginald Haverford's priceless manuscript had cast a pall over the household, and the presence of Hercule Poirot, with his piercing gaze and unyielding questions, only deepened the unease. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with a glass of brandy, felt the weight of the investigation pressing upon him. The clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk and the mysterious key, swirled in his mind, each a piece of a puzzle that refused to cohere. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, his small frame bustling with purpose as he pored over the timeline he had constructed. "The red herrings, mon ami," he said to Hastings, his green eyes gleaming. "They are plentiful, but they cannot obscure the truth from Hercule Poirot." His confidence was infectious, yet Hastings could not shake the feeling that the murderer was playing a clever game, planting distractions to mislead them. Inspector Morris, meanwhile, had seized upon a new theory, one that seemed to promise a swift resolution. During a search of the servants' quarters, a young footman, James Carter, had been found with a wad of banknotes tucked beneath his mattress, far more than a servant's wages could account for. Morris, his moustache bristling with triumph, declared Carter the prime suspect. "He's our man," the inspector announced in the drawing-room, where the guests had gathered after dinner. "A thief caught red-handed, and likely Grayson's killer. He had access to the study, and those notes suggest he was paid to steal the manuscript." The guests reacted with a mix of relief and skepticism. Clara Beaumont's eyes widened, her actress's poise momentarily slipping, while Charles Haverford's lips curled in a faint sneer. Lady Evelyn clutched her necklace, her face pale, and Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles, muttering about hasty conclusions. Mrs. Violet Langley, ever sharp, raised an eyebrow. "A footman? Really, Inspector? It seems too convenient." Poirot, standing quietly by the fireplace, said nothing, but his silence was more eloquent than words. Carter, a lanky youth of 20 with a nervous stutter, was brought before the group, his face flushed with fear. "I didn't kill anyone," he stammered. "The money, it was a gift from Mr. Grayson himself. He gave it to me 2 days ago, said it was for my sister's doctor bills." Morris scoffed, but Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm. "Monsieur Carter, why would Grayson give you such a sum? And why hide it?" Carter's eyes darted to the floor. "He said to keep it quiet. Didn't say why. I swear I wasn't in the study that night." Poirot's gaze softened, but his questions were relentless. "You saw Grayson often, yes? Did he speak of enemies, of secrets?" Carter hesitated, then nodded. "He was worried, sir. Said someone was watching him, someone in the house. He wouldn't say who." Poirot nodded, dismissing the footman, but instructing Morris to keep him under watch. "The money is interesting," he murmured to Hastings, "but it is not the answer. A red herring, perhaps, but one with a purpose." The inspector's focus on Carter allowed Poirot to pursue his own inquiries, which centred on the physical evidence. He returned to the study, Hastings at his side, to re-examine the muddy footprint and the open window. "The footprint," Poirot said, kneeling beside it. "It is too perfect, no? The mud is dry, yet the storm began only at night. This was placed before the rain, perhaps to suggest an intruder." He moved to the window, testing the latch again. "Stiff as I thought. To open it requires strength, yet there are no marks of a struggle. The window was opened deliberately, but by whom?" His attention turned to the small key found under the rug. "This key," he said, holding it up. "It is not for the safe, nor for any door in the manor. It is personal. A drawer, a box, perhaps a diary." He glanced at Hastings. "We must search Grayson's belongings again. The ledger, it holds secrets, and this key may unlock them." In Grayson's room, Poirot examined the ledger more closely. Its cryptic entries, sums, dates, initials, suggesting a hidden financial web. One entry caught his eye. CH, $500, 10/25. CH, Poirot mused. Charles Haverford, perhaps. Or another. He tested the key on a small locked box beneath Grayson's bed, and it clicked open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with string. The topmost letter, addressed to Grayson, read, "You know too much. Keep silent or pay the price." The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and unsigned. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A threat, mon ami. Grayson was no mere valet. He was a man with dangerous knowledge. Returning to the guests, Poirot shifted his approach, focusing on their relationships with Grayson. He began with Sir Reginald, whose agitation had grown since the murder. "Monsieur, your valet, was he loyal, or did he pry into matters not his own?" Sir Reginald flushed. Grayson was efficient, but nosy. "I caught him reading my papers once, though he claimed it was a mistake." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the admission. Mrs. Langley, when questioned, revealed a surprising detail. "Grayson was impertinent," she said sharply. "I overheard him arguing with Charles last week. Something about money owed. I thought it odd for a valet to speak so boldly." Poirot's interest piqued. "And where was this argument, madam?" She hesitated. "In the garden, late at night. I couldn't sleep and was at my window." Clara Beaumont, confronted with the torn silk, denied it came from her gown. "Many dresses are blue, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes wary. Poirot held up the fabric, noting its fine weave. "This silk is distinctive, mademoiselle. We shall see. Hastings, watching, saw a flicker of fear cross her face. Dr. Reed, questioned about his locked medical case, grew defensive. "It's private, monsieur. My tools, nothing more." Poirot's smile was disarming. "And yet, doctor, a letter opener is sharp, like a scalpel. Did you examine Grayson's wound closely?" Reed paled. "I confirmed the cause of death. It was a single stab, clean and deep." Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. The evening brought a new twist when Daphne Sinclair, overcome by nerves, approached Poirot privately. "I saw something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Last night, before the scream, I saw Clara in the hall near the west wing. She looked furtive." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you said nothing until now, mademoiselle. Why?" Daphne's cheeks flushed. "I didn't want to betray a friend, but I'm frightened." Poirot patted her hand. "You have done well to speak. The truth, it protects." As the guests retired, Poirot shared his thoughts with Hastings. "The red herrings, they multiply. Carter's money, Clara's silk, Charles's cigarette case. But the truth lies in the connections. Grayson was a threat, and someone silenced him. The manuscript may be a motive, or it may be a mask." He tapped the bundle of letters. "These will tell us more, but we must tread carefully. The murderer watches us. The manor, cloaked in darkness, seemed to hold its breath." Hastings, glancing at the storm-lashed windows, felt a chill. Poirot, however, was undaunted, his mind a beacon in the fog of deceit. "Tomorrow," he said, "we shall set a trap. The guilty one will reveal themselves, for no one can hide from Hercule Poirot." The night closed in, heavy with secrets, as the investigation took a dangerous turn. Chapter 6. A Clue in the Details. The morning of October 14th, 1925, brought a temporary respite from the storm, though the skies over Blackthorn Manor remained heavy with grey clouds, casting a pallid light through the tall windows. The atmosphere within the manor was no less oppressive. The weight of Thomas Grayson's murder, and the missing manuscript pressing upon every soul. Captain Arthur Hastings, nursing a cup of coffee in the morning room, felt a restless energy, his mind tangled with the clues Hercule Poirot had uncovered. The black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, and now the threatening letters found in Grayson's locked box. Each was a thread in a web of deceit, and Poirot, with his relentless logic, was determined to trace them to their source. Poirot himself stood by the morning room's fireplace, his small frame immaculate in a tailored suit, his waxed moustache gleaming as he studied the bundle of letters from Grayson's room. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice low. "The details, they are the key. A single word, a glance, a gesture, these reveal what lies beneath the surface. We must look closely, for the murderer has been careless in their haste." The day began with Poirot's decision to focus on the physical evidence, particularly the small key and the threatening letters. He summoned Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, to inquire about any locked drawers or boxes in the manor that might match the key's size. Mrs. Poole, her face etched with worry, shook her head. "I know of no such lock, Monsieur Poirot, save perhaps in Mr. Grayson's own belongings. He was particular about his privacy." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. And yet, madame, This key was hidden beneath a rug in the study. Someone wished it to remain undiscovered. Returning to the study, Poirot examined the desk once more, his fingers tracing the edges of the drawers. One, tucked beneath the blotter, was locked, and the key fit perfectly. Inside was a single item, a small notebook, its pages filled with Grayson's precise handwriting. The entries detailed meetings, sums of money, and cryptic references to the agreement and the debt. One entry, dated October 8th, read, "C.H. demands silence. Threatened exposure, must act." Another, from October 10th, noted, "L.E. fears discovery, meeting at midnight." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. C.H. and L.E., Charles Haverford and Lady Evelyn, perhaps? Or another deception? Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. Grayson was blackmailing someone, wasn't he? That's why he was killed. Poirot tilted his head. Possible, mon ami, but blackmail is a dangerous game. You're sûr de force. Grayson was extorting someone. Why kill him in such a public manner? The study, the letter opener, it suggests a crime of passion, or one staged to appear so. Poirot's next move was to confront the guests with these new findings, but he chose his approach carefully, revealing only enough to provoke reactions. In the drawing-room, he gathered the party, his demeanour calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, holding up the notebook. Mr. Grayson kept meticulous records. He knew secrets that someone in this room wished to keep hidden. Who among you met with him in the days before his death? The question hung in the air, met with a chorus of denials. Charles Haverford's face darkened, his hands clenching. "I barely spoke to the man," he snapped. "He was just a valet." Lady Evelyn's handkerchief twisted tighter, her voice faint. "I had no private dealings with him." Clara Beaumont's smile was strained, her eyes darting to Charles. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles, muttering, "I only saw him when he brought Sir Reginald's messages." Mrs. Violet Langley's sharp gaze fixed on Poirot, but she remained silent, her lips pursed. Poirot's attention turned to the torn silk, which he produced from his pocket. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," he said, addressing Clara, "this fabric matches your gown from the night of the murder. It was found caught on a door frame in the servants' hall, far from the dining room where you claim to have been." Clara's composure faltered, her cheeks flushing. "I told you, many gowns are blue. It could belong to anyone." Poirot's smile was polite but unrelenting. "And yet, mademoiselle, the weave is distinctive, and the tear matches a hem I observed in your wardrobe. Care to explain?" Clara hesitated, then laughed lightly. "I may have brushed against a door. I was in the hall briefly, yes, but only to fetch a shawl. I saw nothing." Poirot nodded, but his eyes held hers, and Hastings saw a flicker of fear in her expression. The interrogation shifted to Lady Evelyn, whose reaction to the notebook's mention of L.E. was subtle but telling. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "Grayson wrote of a meeting with Ellie at midnight. Was this you?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "I never met him at such an hour. It must be someone else." Poirot's gaze lingered on her sapphire necklace, which she clutched reflexively. "The truth, madame. It will emerge. It always does." As the interviews continued, a new clue surfaced, one that deepened the mystery. While Poirot questioned Colonel Blake, whose bluster hid a surprising nervousness, Mrs. Poole approached Hastings with a discovery. In the laundry, she had found a man's handkerchief, stained with what appeared to be blood, tucked inside a linen basket. The initials E.W. were embroidered in one corner. Ernest Whitmore, the solicitor. Hastings brought it to Poirot, who examined it with interest. "Blood, perhaps, or a clever imitation," he murmured. "We must test it, but this, too, is a detail that speaks." Poirot confronted Whitmore privately, holding up the handkerchief. "Monsieur, this was found hidden in the laundry. Care to explain?" Whitmore's fastidious manner faltered, his thin moustache twitching. "It's mine, yes, but the stain. I cut my hand shaving yesterday. Nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, monsieur, you did not mention this injury before. Show me your hand." Whitmore extended his hand, revealing a small, fresh cut, but Poirot's expression remained sceptical. "A convenient wound, non?" The day wore on, each interview revealing new contradictions. Daphne Sinclair, tearful and hesitant, admitted to overhearing a heated exchange between Grayson and Dr. Reed in the library 2 days before the murder. "It was about money," she whispered. "I didn't catch much, but Grayson sounded angry." Reed, when questioned, denied any argument, claiming it was a misunderstanding over a medical bill for Sir Reginald. Colonel Blake. Pressed about, his movements admitted to stepping outside briefly to check the stables at 8:25 p.m., though no one corroborated his story. His wife, Beatrice, remained silent, her clasped hands trembling slightly. Poirot noted her reticence, his mind cataloguing every gesture. As evening approached, Poirot retreated to the library with Hastings, his expression thoughtful. "The clues, they multiply, but they point in circles," he said. "The handkerchief, the silk, the notebook, they are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is incomplete. Grayson's death is tied to a secret, one that threatens someone in this house." He tapped the threatening letter. "This speaks of exposure. Grayson knew something dangerous, and the murderer acted to silence him." Hastings frowned. "But the manuscript, surely it's the motive." Poirot shook his head. "The manuscript is a distraction, mon ami. Its theft draws our eyes from the true crime. We must find what Grayson knew, and why it was worth killing. 4. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, the guests barely touching their food. Poirot, seated beside Sir Reginald, observed them all, his eyes missing nothing. Hastings noticed Clara whispering to Charles, whose expression was grim, and Lady Evelyn's gaze lingering on her son with a mix of fear and sorrow. Mrs. Langley's sharp comments cut through the silence, while Whitmore's forced calm betrayed his unease. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mes amis, the truth is near, but it requires one more step. Tomorrow I shall ask you to gather in the study, where we shall examine the scene together. Be prepared." His words were a challenge, and Hastings saw the guests exchange wary glances. The night closed in, the manor silent save for the patter of rain. Hastings, retiring to his room, felt a chill, knowing the murderer was among them, watching Poirot's every move. But Poirot, sipping a tisane, was undaunted. "The details, Hastings," he said. "They will betray the guilty. Hercule Poirot does not fail." The stage was set for a confrontation, and the manor's secrets were poised to unravel. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The morning of October 15th, 1925, broke with a fragile calm over Blackthorn Manor, the storm having subsided to a drizzle that left the ground sodden and the air heavy with damp. Inside, the atmosphere was no less stifling, as the shadow of Thomas Grayson's murder and the theft of the priceless manuscript hung over the household like a curse. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the morning room with a lukewarm cup of tea, felt the weight of the investigation pressing upon him. The clues Hercule Poirot had uncovered, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the threatening letters, the mysterious key, and the blood-stained handkerchief, formed a labyrinth of deception, and Hastings sensed that the truth was tantalizingly close, yet still obscured by layers of lies. Poirot, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit, stood by the window, his green eyes scanning the rain-soaked gardens as if they held answers. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice low but vibrant with purpose. "The lies, they multiply, but they are brittle. One push, and they will crack. Today, we shall uncover more of what these people hide." His confidence, as always, steadied Hastings, though the complexity of the case left him uneasy. The day began with Poirot's decision to delve deeper into the relationships and motives within the household, focusing on the cryptic entries in Grayson's notebook and the threatening letters. He summoned the guests to the drawing room, his demeanour calm but commanding, and announced his intention to explore their connections to Grayson more thoroughly. Inspector Morris, still fixated on the footman James Carter as the prime suspect, watched with grudging curiosity, his notebook open but unused as Poirot took charge. Poirot began with Charles Haverford, whose brooding presence had grown increasingly volatile. Holding up the notebook, Poirot pointed to the entry dated October 8th. "CH demands silence. Threatened exposure." "Monsieur Charles," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "Grayson wrote of a confrontation with someone bearing your initials. What did you fear he would expose?" Charles's face flushed, his hands clenching into fists. "I told you, I barely spoke to him. That entry could mean anyone, Clara even." His outburst drew a sharp glance from Clara Beaumont, whose smile faltered. Poirot turned to Clara, his eyes narrowing. "Mademoiselle, your name also begins with C. Did you have reason to demand Grayson's silence?" Clara's laugh was brittle, her actress's poise strained. "I had no secrets with Grayson. He was a valet, nothing more." Yet her fingers toyed nervously with her sleeve, and Hastings noted the faint scent of lavender as she shifted in her seat. The questioning took a dramatic turn when Poirot produced the blood-stained handkerchief with the initials E.W. and confronted Ernest Whitmore. "Monsieur, you claimed this blood came from a shaving cut, yet the stain is substantial, and the cut on your hand is fresh. Did you injure yourself in the study, perhaps?" Whitmore's fastidious manner cracked, his voice sharp. "I told you, it's nothing. A coincidence, nothing more." Poirot's smile was thin. "Coincidences, monsieur, are rare in murder. We shall see what the blood reveals." The most startling revelation came during Poirot's interview with Lady Evelyn Haverford, whose fragile demeanour had begun to unravel. Poirot, holding the threatening letter, asked gently, "Madam, Grayson wrote of a midnight meeting with Ellie. Was this you? And what did you fear he would discover?" Lady Evelyn's handkerchief was a crumpled ruin in her hands, her voice barely audible. I spoke to him once, late at night. He knew something about my past, a mistake long buried. I begged him to stay silent. Her admission hung in the air, drawing gasps from the guests. Sir Reginald's face darkened, his eyes fixed on his wife. "What mistake?" Poirot pressed, his tone soft but relentless. Lady Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "A debt, years ago, to a man who took advantage. Grayson found a letter from him, hidden in my jewellery box. He said he'd keep quiet, but he wanted money." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession settling like dust. Hastings, shocked, saw Charles's jaw tighten, and Clara's gaze flicker with something like triumph. Poirot's questions revealed further cracks in the guests' stories. Dr. Malcolm Reed, pressed about his alleged argument with Grayson in the library, admitted to a disagreement over a private matter, but refused to elaborate, his spectacles glinting as he avoided Poirot's gaze. Mrs. Violet Langley, when questioned about her eavesdropping, revealed she had seen Grayson slipping a note under Whitmore's door 3 nights before the murder. "It looked suspicious," she said sharply, "but I thought it none of my business." Whitmore, confronted with this, claimed the note was about legal documents, but his unease was palpable. Miss Daphne Sinclair, trembling under Poirot's scrutiny, admitted to overhearing a conversation between Grayson and Sir Reginald in the study a week prior. "Grayson was angry," she whispered. "He said something about the family's shame and needing payment." Sir Reginald, when questioned, denied any such conversation, his voice cold. "The girl is mistaken. Grayson was loyal if overzealous. Colonel Blake, blustering as usual, claimed no knowledge of Grayson's secrets. But his wife, Beatrice, broke her silence for the first time. "I saw Grayson in the hall that night," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "He was carrying a small box, heading toward the west wing." Her admission drew sharp looks from the others, and Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A box, madame? Describe it." Beatrice hesitated. "Small, wooden, with a brass lock. I thought it odd, but I said nothing." Poirot's mind seized on this detail, connecting it to the key found under the rug. He excused the guests, instructing them to remain in the manor, and retreated to the study with Hastings to search for the box. After a meticulous examination, they found it hidden behind a loose panel in the study's bookcase. A small wooden box with a brass lock, perfectly matched to the key. Inside were more letters, these addressed to Sir Reginald, detailing a financial scheme involving forged investments and implicating both Grayson and Whitmore. One letter, unsigned but in the same feminine hand as the threat, read, "The truth will ruin you. Pay or I speak." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "The net tightens, mon ami. Grayson was no mere valet. He was a broker of secrets, and someone in this house silenced him to protect their own." Hastings frowned. "But who?" "Lady Evelyn admitted to blackmail, but she seems too fragile to kill. Charles? Clara?" Poirot shook his head. "The motive is not yet clear, but the lies, they point to a deeper truth. The box, the letters, they are the heart of this mystery." As evening fell, Poirot gathered the guests once more. his voice grave. Mesdames et messieurs, secrets have been uncovered. Debts, threats, betrayals. Grayson knew too much, and his knowledge cost him his life. I ask you now, who among you wrote this? He held up the threatening letter, watching their faces. No one spoke, but Hastings saw Clara's hand tremble, Whitmore's face pale, and Lady Evelyn's eyes dart to her husband. Dinner was a sombre affair, the guests barely speaking. Poirot, seated beside Hastings, whispered, "The lies they are, crumbling. Tomorrow we shall push harder. The murderer believes they are safe, but they underestimate Hercule Poirot." The manor, shrouded in dusk, seemed to hold its breath, its secrets teetering on the edge of exposure. Hastings, glancing at the tense faces around the table, knew the investigation was reaching a critical point, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point, the evening of October 15th, 1925, settled over Blackthorn Manor with a quiet menace. The drizzle outside giving way to an eerie stillness that mirrored the tension within. The murder of Thomas Grayson and the theft of the priceless manuscript had unravelled the veneer of civility among the guests, and Hercule Poirot's relentless probing had exposed a tangle of secrets, debts, threats, and betrayals that pointed to a deeper motive. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the drawing room with a glass of untouched whisky, felt the weight of the investigation like a storm about to break. The clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, and the incriminating letters had painted a picture of deceit. But the murderer remained elusive. Poirot, standing by the fireplace, his small frame radiating purpose, surveyed the guests with his piercing green eyes. His waxed moustache twitched slightly, a sign Hastings recognized as the detective's mind working at full tilt. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered to Hastings, "tonight we reach a turning point. The guilty one grows nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. We must press gently but firmly to force the truth into the light." The day had been one of revelations, with Lady Evelyn's admission of blackmail and the discovery of the wooden box containing letters implicating Grayson in a financial scheme. Poirot, sensing the guests' facades cracking, decided to escalate his approach. He announced a gathering in the drawing room after dinner, where he would discuss new evidence. The guests, already on edge, exchanged wary glances, their nerves frayed by the prospect of further scrutiny. As the clock struck 8, the party assembled, their faces a study in suppressed emotion. Sir Reginald, his authority diminished by the scandal, sat stiffly, his eyes avoiding his wife. Lady Evelyn, her sapphire necklace a stark contrast to her pallor, clutched her handkerchief, her composure brittle. Charles Haverford's brooding intensity had given way to a restless agitation, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. Clara Beaumont, her actress's poise strained, forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles incessantly, while Mrs. Violet Langley's sharp gaze darted from face to face. Ernest Whitmore, the solicitor, maintained a veneer of calm, but his thin moustache twitched with unease. Miss Daphne Sinclair, pale and trembling, seemed on the verge of collapse, while Colonel Blake's bluster had quieted, his ruddy face clouded with worry. Beatrice Blake, as ever, sat silently, her hands clasped tightly. Poirot began with a deliberate calm, holding up the wooden box from the study. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and commanding, "this box, hidden behind a wood panel, contained letters that reveal Mr. Grayson's role in a scheme of deceit. He was no mere valet. He was a keeper of secrets, and those secrets cost him his life. One letter, in particular, threatens exposure of a family shame. Who among you feared this exposure?" The question hung in the air, met with silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, Daphne Sinclair burst into tears, her voice breaking as she spoke. "It was me!" she cried, her hands covering her face. "I wrote to Grayson, begging him to stay silent. He knew about my past, a scandal in London, a man I trusted who betrayed me. He said he'd tell everyone unless I paid him." The room erupted in murmurs, the guests exchanging shocked glances. Hastings, stunned, saw Clara's eyes narrow, while Charles's face hardened. Poirot's expression was one of gentle compassion, but his questions were relentless. "Mademoiselle Daphne, when did you write this letter?" Daphne sobbed, her voice barely coherent. 3 days ago. I slipped it under his door. I didn't want Clara to know. She's my friend, and she'd think less of me." Poirot nodded, his eyes flicking to Clara, whose smile had vanished. "And did you meet Grayson in the study, mademoiselle? Did you confront him?" Daphne shook her head vehemently. "No, I never went near the study that night. I was in the dining room, I swear." Poirot's gaze softened, but he pressed further. "And the torn silk found in the servants' hall, does it belong to you?" Daphne's eyes widened. "No, that's not mine. I wore green that night, not blue." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. The confession shifted the room's dynamic, suspicion turning toward Daphne. But Poirot was not finished. He turned to Lady Evelyn, whose earlier admission of blackmail had stunned the group. "Madame, you, too, were threatened by Grayson. Did you know of Mademoiselle Daphne's secret?" Lady Evelyn's lips trembled, her voice faint. "I suspected, but I didn't know details. Grayson hinted at many secrets, not just mine." Her eyes darted to her husband, who looked away, his face a mask of anger. Poirot's next question was directed at Charles. "Monsieur, Grayson's notebook mentions CH and a demand for silence. Your cigarette case was found in the study. Did you confront him about his blackmail?" Charles's voice was sharp, his eyes blazing. "I told you, I wasn't in the study that night. Yes, Grayson tried to extort me. Something about a gambling debt I owed years ago. But I didn't kill him." His outburst drew a gasp from Clara, who reached for his hand, only to have it brushed away. The emotional weight of these revelations began to unravel the guests. Mrs. Langley, unable to contain herself, spoke up. "Grayson was a viper," she snapped. "I saw him whispering with Whitmore in the garden days ago, plotting something. Don't pretend you're innocent, Mr. Whitmore." The solicitor's face paled, his voice tight. "Mrs. Langley, you're mistaken. Grayson and I discussed Sir Reginald's investments, nothing more." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, monsieur, your handkerchief stained with blood suggests otherwise. Was it truly a shaving cut?" The room teetered on the edge of chaos, accusations flying like sparks. Colonel Blake, his voice rising, declared, "This is madness. You're all pointing fingers, but what about the footman Carter? He had the money." Inspector Morris nodded vigorously, but Poirot raised a hand. "Monsieur Carter's money is a distraction, Colonel. The truth lies here among you. Someone in this room stabbed Grayson, and the manuscript's theft was a cover for a deeper motive." As the tension peaked, Beatrice Blake, silent until now, spoke in a trembling voice. "I can't stay quiet any more," she said, her hands unclenching. "I saw something that night before the scream. It was in the West Wing near the study. I saw Clara holding a letter opener standing by the door." The room froze, all eyes turning to Clara, whose face drained of colour. "That's a lie!" she cried, her voice shrill. "I was never there. Beatrice, why would you say such a thing?" Poirot's gaze locked onto Clara. "Madame Blake, you are certain of this?" Beatrice nodded, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe it, but I saw her. She looked frightened, as if she'd done something terrible." Clara stood, her actress's poise shattered. "This is absurd. I was in my room, then the dining room. I never touched a letter opener." Her sheer voice broke, and she sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough, mes amis. The truth is near, but we must not rush. Madame Blake's testimony is a piece of the puzzle, but it is not the whole. I ask you all to reflect tonight. Tomorrow we shall gather in the study, and I shall reveal more." His words were a command, and the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. In the library, Poirot confided in Hastings. "The confessions, they are the crack in the dam, mon ami. Daphne, Lady Evelyn, now Beatrice, they reveal what they know, but not all. Clara's denial is fierce, but her fear betrays her. We are close." Hastings frowned. "Do you think Clara did it?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The truth, it is like a shadow. It moves as the light shifts. We shall see. The manor, cloaked in darkness, seemed to pulse with secrets." Hastings, retiring to his room, felt the weight of the night's revelations. Poirot, sipping a tisane, remained serene. "Tomorrow, mon ami, we set the trap. The murderer cannot hide much longer. The stage was set, and Blackthorn Manor's secrets were on the verge of exposure." Chapter 9. The trap is set the morning of October 16th, 1925, dawned with a fragile clarity over Blackthorn Manor, the clouds parting to reveal a pale sun that did little to warm the chill within. The emotional revelations of the previous evening, Daphne, Sinclair's confession of blackmail, Lady Evelyn's admission of a buried scandal, and Beatrice Blake's accusation against Clara Beaumont, had left the guests in a state of raw unease. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the morning room with a cup of tepid coffee, felt the tension like a taut wire, ready to snap. The clues Hercule Poirot had meticulously gathered: the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and the incriminating notebook, pointed to a web of deceit. But the murderer's identity remained just out of reach. Poirot, standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, radiated a quiet intensity. His waxed moustache gleamed in the weak sunlight, and his green eyes sparkled with the anticipation of a hunter closing in on his prey. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice low but vibrant, "today we set the trap. The guilty one is nervous, and nervousness leads to mistakes. We shall gather them in the study, and the truth it will emerge." Hastings, stirred by his friend's confidence, nodded. "You think Clara's the key, don't you?" Beatrice saw her with the letter-opener. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Madame Blake's testimony is compelling, but it is one piece of a larger mosaic. The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they do not know Hercule Poirot. Poirot's plan was to recreate the scene of the crime, assembling the guests in the study to observe their reactions and provoke a slip. He instructed Sir Reginald to ensure everyone attended, and Inspector Morris, though sceptical, agreed to assist, his faith in the footman James Carter as the culprit waning under Poirot's relentless logic. The study, still bearing the marks of the crime, scattered papers, the overturned chair, the open safe, was a grim stage for what Poirot called a little experiment in psychology. At noon, the guests gathered in the study, their faces a tableau of dread and suspicion. Sir Reginald stood by the desk, his authority diminished by the scandal. Lady Evelyn, clutching her sapphire necklace, seemed on the verge of collapse. Charles, Haverford's brooding intensity had hardened into defiance, his eyes darting to Clara, who maintained a fragile poise, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles nervously, while Mrs. Violet Langley's sharp gaze missed nothing. Ernest Whitmore's fastidious calm was strained, his thin moustache twitching. Daphne Sinclair, pale and tearful, avoided Clara's gaze, while Colonel Blake's bluster had given way to a grim silence. Beatrice Blake, her hands no longer clasped, looked haunted by her own words. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, holding the blood-stained letter-opener, its silver handle gleaming. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and commanding, "we stand where Mr. Grayson met his end. A single stab, precise and deadly, ended his life, and the manuscript was taken. But why? Was it greed, fear, or revenge? Let us retrace the night of October 12th. He moved to the desk, placing the letter-opener where it had been found. At 8:30 p.m., Grayson was stabbed here. The safe was forced, the window opened, a muddy footprint left on the carpet. Yet there was no struggle suggesting he knew his attacker. Who was in the West Wing? He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, Madame Blake places you here, holding this very letter-opener. What say you?" Clara's face flushed, her voice sharp. "It's a lie. I was in my room, then the dining room. Beatrice is mistaken, or malicious." Beatrice, trembling, whispered, "I saw what I saw. You were here, Clara." The accusation hung heavy, and Hastings saw Charles's hands clench, his eyes blazing. Poirot shifted to Charles. "Monsieur, your cigarette case was found near the safe. You claim it was left earlier, yet it was clean, as if placed recently. Were you here?" Charles's voice was low, almost a growl. "I told you I was on the terrace. I didn't kill him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Grayson's notebook mentions CH and a demand for silence. A gambling debt, perhaps." Poirot turned to the window, pointing to the footprint. This mud, it was dry before the storm began, suggesting it was placed earlier, A staged clue, perhaps, to suggest an outsider. He produced the threatening letter. And this, found in Grayson's box, warns of exposure. Who feared his knowledge? His gaze swept the room, lingering on Lady Evelyn, who flinched, and Whitmore, whose composure wavered. The tension broke when Daphne, unable to bear the pressure, spoke in a rush. "I didn't tell everything," she cried. "Grayson wasn't just blackmailing me. He said he had proof, documents, that could ruin the Haverfords. He showed me a letter, said it was from Sir Reginald's past, something about forged investments." Sir Reginald's face reddened, his voice hoarse. "That's preposterous! Grayson was loyal." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Loyal, monsieur, or opportunistic. His notebook and letters suggest he profited from secrets." He held up the blood-stained handkerchief. "Monsieur Whitmore, this bears your initials. Was it used to clean the letter opener?" Whitmore's voice was sharp. "I told you, it's from a shaving cut." Poirot nodded, but his scepticism was clear. The trap tightened as Poirot moved to the safe, reenacting its opening. The lock was forced, yet with precision. This requires skill, not haste. Who among you has such skill? His eyes flicked to Dr. Reed, whose hands trembled. "Doctor, your medical case is locked. Might it contain tools for such a task?" Reed's voice was unsteady. "My instruments are for healing, not crime." Poirot's final move was to place the small wooden box on the desk, unlocking it with the key. This box, hidden in the study, contained letters implicating Grayson in a scheme with Monsieur Whitmore and others. Who wrote this threat? He held up the unsigned letter, watching as Clara's hand twitched. Lady Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and Whitmore's face paled. The room erupted in chaos. Clara stood, her voice shrill. "You're accusing everyone, Monsieur Poirot. I won't stand for it." Charles grabbed her arm, hissing, "Be quiet, Clara." Lady Evelyn sobbed, "I only wanted to protect my family." Whitmore snapped, "This is madness." Even Colonel Blake, usually bombastic, looked shaken, while Beatrice's gaze darted to her husband. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough. The trap is set and the guilty one feels its pressure. I know more than I say, and tomorrow, in this room, I shall name the murderer. Reflect, mes amis, for the truth cannot be hidden." His words were a thunderclap, and the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear. In the library, Poirot confided in Hastings. "The reactions, mon ami, they tell us much. Clara's fear, Charles's anger, Lady Evelyn's tears, they are pieces of the truth. The murderer believes they are safe, but they are not." Hastings frowned. "You're sure it's one of them?" Poirot's smile was serene. "The little grey cells, they do not lie. The notebook, the letters, the clues, they point to one truth." As night fell, the manor seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the distant drip of rain. Hastings, retiring to his room, felt the weight of the impending confrontation. Poirot, sipping a tisane, was calm but resolute. "Tomorrow, mon ami, the trap will spring. The murderer will be revealed, for no one escapes Hercule Poirot." The stage was set, and Blackthorn Manor's secrets were poised to unravel. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The morning of October 17th, 1925, dawned with a brittle stillness over Blackthorn Manor. The pale sunlight filtering through the windows casting long shadows across the polished floors. The tension that had gripped the household since Thomas Grayson's murder and the theft of the priceless manuscript had reached a fever pitch. The guests' nerves frayed by Hercule Poirot's relentless probing and the trap he had set the previous day. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the drawing-room with a cup of cold tea, felt his heart race with anticipation. The clues! The black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's incriminating notebook had woven a complex web, and Poirot had promised to unravel it today. Poirot stood at the centre of the study, where the guests were once again assembled, his small frame commanding the room with an air of quiet authority. His waxed moustache gleamed, and his green eyes sparkled with the certainty of a man who had solved the puzzle. Inspector Morris, standing by the door with a sceptical frown, clutched his notebook, while Sir Reginald, pale and drawn, sat beside the desk where Grayson had died. The guests, Lady Evelyn, Charles Haverford, Clara Beaumont, Dr. Malcolm Reed, Mrs. Violet Langley, Ernest Whitmore, Daphne Sinclair, Colonel Rupert Blake, and Beatrice Blake, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a mixture of dread, defiance, and curiosity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, "we have gathered in this room where Mr. Thomas Grayson met his end to uncover the truth. A man was murdered, a manuscript stolen, and a web of lies spun to conceal the guilty. But Hercule Poirot does not permit lies to triumph. With my little grey cells, I have pieced together the mosaic of this crime, and now I shall reveal the murderer." The room was silent, the air thick with expectation. Hastings, watching closely, saw Clara's hands tighten in her lap, Charles's jaw clench, and Lady Evelyn's eyes fill with tears. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, as he began his reconstruction. "Let us begin with the crime itself," he said. "Grayson was stabbed at 8:30 p.m. on October 12th, with a letter opener from this desk. The safe was forced, the manuscript taken, the window opened, and a muddy footprint left on the carpet. These suggest an intruder, yet there was no struggle, no signs of forced entry save the safe. Grayson knew his killer, trusted them, and was taken by surprise. He held up the black glove, its CB monogram stark. This glove, found on the staircase, points to Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont. Yet she claims it was dropped innocently. The torn silk, matching her gown, was found in the servants' hall, far from her stated path, and Madame Beatrice Blake saw her near the study with a letter opener. Suspicious, no? Clara's face paled, her voice sharp. "I told you, it's a mistake. I was never here." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, mademoiselle. Let us consider others." Monsieur Charles Haverford's cigarette case was found near the safe, clean and recently placed. His notebook entry, "CH demands silence," suggests he feared Grayson's knowledge of a gambling debt. Monsieur Ernest Whitmore's handkerchief, stained with blood, raises questions despite his claim of a shaving cut. And Madame Lady Evelyn admitted to blackmail over a past debt, while Mademoiselle Daphne confessed to a scandal Grayson threatened to expose. He turned to the desk, pointing to the word trust on the scrap of paper. This word, written by Grayson as he died, is no mere clue. It is the heart of the crime. Grayson trusted his killer, and that trust was betrayed. But who? Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. The manuscript's theft was a distraction, meant to draw our eyes from the true motive, Grayson's blackmail. His notebook and letters reveal a man who profited from secrets, debts, scandals, forgeries. He was a danger to many here, but only one acted. He produced the threatening letter, its feminine handwriting stark. This letter, found in Grayson's box, warns of exposure. It matches another, found in Madame Lady Evelyn's wastebasket, urging her to act soon. But the handwriting is not hers. It is Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont's. Clara stood, her voice shrill. "That's absurd! I wrote no such letter!" Poirot's eyes locked onto hers. "Mademoiselle, your denial is expected, but the evidence does not lie. The lavender perfume in the study matches your scent, the silk matches your gown, and Madame Blake saw you here. But let us go further." He turned to the safe. The lock was forced with precision, requiring skill. "Dr. Reed, your medical case contains tools capable of such work. Yet you deny involvement. Monsieur Whitmore, your financial dealings with Grayson, noted in his ledger, suggest a motive. But the true key is this." He held up the small wooden box, unlocking it with the key. "These letters implicate a scheme involving forged investments, orchestrated by Grayson and Monsieur Whitmore." Whitmore's face drained of colour. "Preposterous! I had no part in any scheme." Poirot's smile was cold. "The letters say otherwise, monsieur. But you did not kill Grayson. You were his accomplice, silenced by fear of exposure." Poirot turned back to Clara. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, you were engaged to Monsieur Charles, yet your heart was not his. Grayson knew this, did he not? He knew of your affair with another, a secret that would ruin your engagement and your reputation. You wrote the threatening letter, demanding his silence, but he demanded payment. On the night of October 12th, you came to the study, perhaps to negotiate. You took the letter opener, and when Grayson refused to yield, you stabbed him in a moment of desperation." Clara's eyes widened, her voice breaking. "No! I loved Charles. I would never." Poirot cut her off. "You loved your future, mademoiselle. The manuscript's theft was a cover, the window open to suggest an intruder, the footprint staged with mud from earlier. But you were careless. The silk tore, the glove was dropped, and the lavender betrayed you." Charles stood, his face a mask of fury. "You're lying! Clara wouldn't do this!" But Clara, trembling, sank to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't mean to. He wouldn't stop. He said he'd tell everyone, ruin me. I just wanted him to stop." Her confession echoed in the silent room, a dam breaking under Poirot's pressure. "Inspector," Morris stepped forward, his face grim. "Miss Beaumont, you're under arrest." Clara, weeping, was led away, her poise shattered. The guests, stunned, sat in silence, their secrets laid bare. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice soft. "The truth, mon ami, it is always there, hidden in the details. Clara's fear, her lies, her perfume, they told the story." Hastings nodded, awed by his friend's genius. "But the manuscript?" Poirot smiled. "It will be found, likely hidden in her room. The theft was a ruse, nothing more. As the guests dispersed, Sir Reginald approached Poirot, his voice heavy. "Thank you, monsieur. You've saved us from further ruin." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is my duty, monsieur, to bring order to chaos." The manor, freed from its burden of secrets, seemed to breathe again. Clara's arrest was a shock, but the truth had restored a fragile peace. Poirot, his task complete, prepared to depart, his little grey cells triumphant once more. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The afternoon of October 17th, 1925, cast a subdued light over Blackthorn Manor, the pale sun filtering through the windows and softening the harsh edges of the previous day's turmoil. The arrest of Clara Beaumont for the murder of Thomas Grayson had lifted the oppressive weight of suspicion, but it left behind a sombre air, as if the manor itself mourned the unravelling of its secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with a glass of brandy, felt a mix of relief and melancholy. The clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's notebook, had led Hercule Poirot to a truth that was both shocking and inevitable. Yet, as always, Poirot's genius had brought order to chaos. Poirot himself sat across from Hastings, sipping a tisane with his characteristic precision, his green eyes reflective but serene. His waxed moustache gleamed in the firelight, and his small frame seemed almost to glow with the satisfaction of a case well solved. "Mon ami," he said, his voice soft but resonant, "the affair is concluded, yet there is always a moment for reflection. The human heart, it is complex, no? It drives us to great deeds and to great crimes." Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the dramatic confrontation in the study. Clara's tearful confession had stunned the guests, her carefully crafted poise crumbling under Poirot's relentless logic. The manuscript, as Poirot predicted, had been found hidden in a false compartment in Clara's wardrobe, confirming that its theft was a mere ruse to mask her true motive, silencing Grayson's blackmail. The other guests, though shaken, had begun to resume their routines, their secrets exposed but their guilt absolved. Yet Hastings sensed that the manor would never fully recover its former warmth. "You were magnificent, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with admiration. "The way you pieced it all together. The glove, the perfume, the letters. I thought Charles or Whitmore might have done it, but Clara—" He shook his head. "How did you know?" Poirot's smile was gentle, almost indulgent. "The little grey cells, mon ami. They see what the eyes do not. From the first, I suspected Mademoiselle Clara. The lavender perfume, so distinctive, was a thread that led to her. The torn silk, the glove with her initials, these were careless mistakes made in panic. But it was her behaviour, her fear disguised as poise, that confirmed it. The human heart betrays itself in the smallest gestures. A glance, a tremor, a adieu, lie told too smoothly." Hastings frowned, still puzzling over the details. But the footprint, the open window, those were meant to suggest an outsider, weren't they? Poirot nodded. "Précisément. Clara was clever, but not clever enough. The footprint was staged with mud from earlier in the day before the storm. The window, open to mislead, bore no marks of an intruder. She hoped to divert suspicion, But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot. The conversation turned to the other guests whose secrets had been laid bare. Lady Evelyn's admission of a past debt, Daphne's scandal, Charles's gambling debts, and Whitmore's involvement in Grayson's financial schemes had painted a picture of a household riddled with hidden shame. They all had motives, Hastings said. Why Clara, and not one of them? Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes distant. Each had a secret, yes, but only Clara acted. Grayson's blackmail threatened her future, her engagement to Charles, her place in society. She is an actress, accustomed to playing roles, but in the study she played the role of murderer. The letter opener, a weapon of opportunity, was her choice in a moment of desperation. The word trust, written by Grayson as he died, was his final accusation. She was the one he trusted, and she betrayed him. Hastings leaned back, marvelling at his friend's insight. And the manuscript? Why steal it at all? Poirot's smile was wry. A distraction, mon ami. Clara knew its value would draw attention, masking her true motive. She hid it poorly, believing it would not be found until she could dispose of it. But the little grey cells, they see through such ruses. As they spoke, Sir Reginald entered the library, his face etched with weariness, but also gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice heavy, I cannot thank you enough. You've saved my family from further disgrace, though the cost— He trailed off, his eyes drifting to the portrait of his wife above the fireplace. Evelyn is devastated, and Charles, well, he loved Clara, or thought he did. Poirot bowed slightly, his expression sympathetic. Monsieur, the truth is often painful, but it is necessary. Your household was poisoned by secrets, and Grayson's greed fed that poison. Mademoiselle Clara chose a deadly path, but now justice will prevail. Sir Reginald nodded, his shoulders sagging as he left the room. The other guests, too, had begun to process the revelation. Lady Evelyn, though fragile, had regained some composure, her confession lifting a burden she had carried for years. Charles, shattered by Clara's betrayal, had retreated to his room, his future uncertain. Daphne, tearful but relieved, had apologized to the group for her silence, while Mrs. Langley's sharp tongue had softened, her respect for Poirot evident. Whitmore, implicated in Grayson's schemes, faced legal scrutiny, but avoided a murder, charge. Colonel Blake and Beatrice, shaken by the ordeal, spoke little, their marriage strained by unspoken tensions. Inspector Morris, though initially resistant, approached Poirot with grudging respect. "You've a sharp mind, monsieur," he admitted, closing his notebook. "I'd have pinned it on the footman carter, but you saw what I missed." Poirot's smile was modest. "The evidence, Inspector, it speaks if one listens. You will find the manuscript's return will ease Sir Reginald's loss." As evening approached, Poirot prepared to depart, his work at Blackthorn Manor complete. He and Hastings stood in the hall, their bags packed, the manor's grandeur now tinged with melancholy. "What now, Poirot?" Hastings asked. "Back to London." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Oui, mon ami, but first a moment to reflect. The human heart, it is a mystery greater than any crime. We solve the murder, but the heart, that remains elusive." They stepped outside, the crisp autumn air a stark contrast to the manor's stifling atmosphere. The car awaited, its driver, ready to take them to the station. Poirot paused, glancing back at the ivy-clad walls. Blackthorn Manor will heal Hastings, but it will not forget, nor shall we. With a final bow to the house, he climbed into the car, his mind already turning to the next challenge. Hastings, following, felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's brilliance. The case had been a masterclass in observation, logic, and psychology, and Poirot had navigated it with unmatched finesse. As the car pulled away, the manor receded into the distance, its secrets laid bare, its wounds beginning to mend. The truth had prevailed, and Hercule Poirot, as always, had triumphed. Chapter 12. Shadows of Motive. The evening of October 17th, 1925 settled over Blackthorn Manor, with a quiet that felt more like a held breath than true peace. The revelation of Clara Beaumont as Thomas Grayson's murderer had brought a resolution to the crime, but the echoes of her confession lingered, stirring unease among the guests. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the drawing-room window, watched the last rays of sunlight fade over the Somerset hills, his mind still reeling from Poirot's masterful unravelling of the case, the clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's notebook, had all pointed to Clara. Yet Hastings sensed there were deeper currents in the manor's secrets that Poirot had yet to fully explore. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair by the fire, sipped his tisane with his usual precision, his green eyes thoughtful, his waxed moustache gleamed in the lamplight, and his small hands were folded neatly, betraying none of the restless energy that Hastings knew drove his friend's mind. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft, but tinged with a rare note of caution. "The case is solved, yet the shadows of motive remain. Clara Beaumont killed Grayson, oui, but why did she act alone? And what drove her to such desperation? These questions, they linger." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "You mean there's more to it?" Clara confessed. "She killed Grayson to silence his blackmail about her affair." Poirot tilted his head, his expression enigmatic. "Précisément, but the affair, it is only part of the story. The heart of this crime lies not just in what Grayson knew, but in what others feared he might reveal. We must probe deeper, for the truth is like a tapestry. Pull one thread, and others unravel." The day had been spent tying up loose ends. Inspector Morris, now fully deferring to Poirot's judgment, had overseen the recovery of the stolen manuscript, found exactly where Poirot predicted in Clara's wardrobe. Its return had brought Sir Reginald some relief, though his family's reputation remained tarnished. Clara, under arrest and awaiting transfer to the local jail, had retreated into a sullen silence, her actress's poise replaced by a hollow resignation. The other guests, though cleared of murder, were grappling with their own exposed secrets, their interaction strained by mutual distrust. Poirot, however, was not content to rest. He summoned Hastings to the library, where he spread out Grayson's notebook and the threatening letters, his fingers tracing the cryptic entries. "The notebook," he said, "it speaks of C.H. and L.E., Charles and Lady Evelyn, perhaps, but also others. Grayson was a spider, weaving a web of blackmail. Clara was his victim, but was she his only one? He pointed to an A entry dated October 5th. EW, $200, urgent, refuses more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur Whitmore, he was entangled, yet he did not kill. Why? Hastings leaned forward. You think Whitmore was protecting someone else? Poirot nodded. Possible, mon ami. The blood-stained handkerchief, it was his, yet the blood was not Grayson's, as the inspector confirmed. A shaving cut, he claims, but the timing is suspicious. And Madame Beatrice Blake, her testimony against Clara was decisive, yet her silence before was telling. Why did she wait? Determined to explore these shadows, Poirot requested private interviews with key figures, starting with Ernest Whitmore. The solicitor, his fastidious manner frayed, sat stiffly in the library, his thin moustache twitching. Monsieur Whitmore, Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild. Grayson's notebook shows payments from you, and the threatening letter matches your careful script. You were involved in his schemes, no? Whitmore's face paled, but he shook his head. I paid him to keep quiet about a business deal. A mistake, not a crime. I didn't kill him. Poirot held up the handkerchief. And this blood, not Grayson's, yet found hidden. Whose is it? Whitmore hesitated, then said, It was mine, as I said. I cut myself shaving, nothing more. Poirot's smile was thin. And yet, monsieur, you were seen near the west wing at 8:10 p.m. by a maid. You did not mention this. Were you protecting someone? Whitmore's eyes darted away, but he remained silent. Next, Poirot spoke with Beatrice Blake, whose quiet demeanour had masked a keen observation. She sat with her hands unclenched, her face pale but resolute. Madame, Poirot said gently, you saw Mademoiselle Clara with the letter-opener, yet you waited to speak. Why? Beatrice's voice trembled. I was afraid. Clara was my friend, or so I thought. I saw her in the west wing, looking frightened, and I didn't want to believe she could kill. But when you pressed, I couldn't stay silent. Poirot's eyes softened. And the wooden box you saw Grayson carrying, did you know its contents? Beatrice shook her head. No, but he was secretive, always whispering with someone, Whitmore, Charles, even Lady Evelyn. I thought it was just servant gossip, but now. She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Poirot's final interview was with Charles Haverford, whose anger had given way to a hollow grief. Monsieur Charles, Poirot said, Clara killed to protect her secret. But did you know of her affair? Charles's jaw tightened, his voice low. I suspected, but I loved her. Grayson taunted me about it, said he'd ruin her. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, noting the pain in his eyes. And the cigarette case left in the study, your carelessness or another's? Charles frowned. I don't know. I swear I left it earlier. As the interviews concluded, Poirot retreated to the library with Hastings, his expression thoughtful. The shadows, mon ami, they deepen. Clara acted alone in the murder, but others knew more than they admit. Whitmore's payments, Beatrice's silence, Charles's suspicions, they form a pattern. Grayson's blackmail touched many lives, and while Clara struck the fatal blow, others may have wished it. Hastings frowned. You mean an accomplice? Poirot shook his head. Not precisely. But consider the handkerchief, the staged footprint, the open window. These were not all Clara's doing. Someone else, perhaps, helped create the illusion of an intruder. He tapped the notebook. Whitmore's payments suggest he feared exposure, but he did not kill. Beatrice's testimony was true, but delayed. Why? The evening brought a quiet dinner. The guests subdued, their conversations stilted. Lady Evelyn, her composure partially restored, spoke little, her eyes avoiding her son. Charles, still reeling from Clara's betrayal, ate in silence, while Daphne's nervous chatter filled the gaps. Mrs. Langley's sharp comments were tempered, her respect for Poirot evident. Colonel Blake, his bluster muted, glanced often at his wife, whose newfound voice had surprised him. As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his voice calm but firm. "Mes amis, the murder is solved, but the motives linger. I ask you to reflect on your silence, for it too has consequences. Tomorrow I depart, but the truth remains." His words, though gentle, carried a weight that silenced the room. In the library, Poirot confided in Hastings. "The case, it is closed, yet the heart of Blackthorn Manor beats with secrets. Clara killed, but others enabled her through their fear. The lesson, mon ami, is that silence can be as deadly as a blade." Hastings nodded, awed by his friend's insight. "You've done it again, Poirot. The manor is free in a way." Poirot's smile was wistful. "Free, perhaps, but scarred. The truth heals, but it leaves marks." As night fell, the manor seemed quieter, its secrets no longer a threat, but a memory. Poirot, his task complete, prepared for departure, his little grey cells already anticipating the next challenge. Chapter 13. The Unseen Threads. The morning of October 18th, 1925, brought a tentative brightness to Blackthorn Manor, the sun piercing the thinning clouds to cast a golden glow over the Somerset countryside. Yet within the manor's walls the atmosphere remained heavy. The resolution of Thomas Grayson's murder unable to fully dispel the shadows of deceit that lingered. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the library window, watched the grounds awaken, his thoughts tangled with the complexities of the case. Clara Beaumont's confession had closed the book on the murder, but Hercule Poirot's probing had revealed a household riddled with secrets, each guest complicit in their silence. The clues, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's notebook, had painted a vivid picture. Yet Hastings sensed that Poirot was not entirely satisfied. Poirot, seated at a small table with his customary tisane, was as impeccable as ever, his waxed moustache gleaming, and his green eyes alight with a restless curiosity. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice soft but tinged with intensity, "the murderer is caught, the manuscript recovered, yet the unseen threads of this affair remain. The crime is solved, but the motives, they are like shadows, shifting and elusive. We must examine them one final time before we depart." Hastings, puzzled, leaned forward. "You mean there's more to uncover?" Clara confessed. She killed Grayson to silence his blackmail. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Oui, Mademoiselle Clara is guilty, but the web of this crime is woven with many hands. The silence of others, their fears, their secrets, they enabled her act. We must understand why, for the truth, it is never singular. Poirot's focus turned to the lingering questions surrounding the other guests, particularly Ernest Whitmore and Beatrice Blake, whose roles in the affair seemed incomplete. He requested a final round of private conversations, not to accuse, but to clarify the threads he sensed still connected the household. Sir Reginald, though weary, agreed, eager to see the matter fully resolved before Poirot's departure. Inspector Morris, now a reluctant admirer of Poirot's methods, remained on hand, his notebook open, but his role reduced to observer. Poirot began with Beatrice Blake, whose quiet testimony had been pivotal in exposing Clara. She sat in the morning room, her hands no longer clasped tightly, but her eyes betrayed a lingering guilt. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "you saw Mademoiselle Clara with the letter-opener, yet you waited to speak. Was it only fear for your friend, or something more?" Beatrice's voice was low, almost a whisper. I knew Clara was troubled. She confided in me days before, said Grayson was pressuring her about something, a secret she wouldn't share. I didn't want to believe she could kill, but when I saw her that night, I knew. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the wooden box you saw Grayson carrying, did you suspect its contents?" Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "I thought it might be papers, something he used to control people. He was always so secretive, always watching. I should have spoken sooner." Poirot's expression softened. "Your silence, madame, was born of loyalty, but it allowed the crime to fester. You have helped now, and that is enough." Next, Poirot spoke with Ernest Whitmore, whose involvement in Grayson's financial schemes had been exposed by the letters in the wooden box. The solicitor's fastidious demeanour was frayed, his thin moustache twitching as he faced Poirot. "Monsieur Whitmore," Poirot said, holding up the blood-stained handkerchief. "This blood was not Grayson's, yet it was hidden. You paid Grayson to keep silent about forged investments. Did you know of Clara's plan?" Whitmore's face paled, his voice sharp. "I knew nothing of murder. Grayson was blackmailing me, yes, about a deal gone wrong years ago. I paid to protect my reputation, but I didn't kill him." Poirot tilted his head. "And the handkerchief? It's blood, it is yours, but why hide it?" Whitmore hesitated, then sighed. "I cut my hand that night, not shaving, but handling a broken glass in my room. I hid the handkerchief because I feared it would look suspicious. I swear I had no part in the murder." Poirot's gaze was piercing, but he nodded. "Your fear, monsieur, made you complicit in silence, but not in blood." The final conversation was with Charles Haverford, whose heartbreak over Clara's betrayal had left him a shadow of himself. He sat slumped in a chair, his dark eyes hollow. "Monsieur Charles," Poirot said, "you suspected Clara's affair, yet you protected her. Did you know of her meeting with Grayson?" Charles's voice was bitter. "I knew she was hiding something. Grayson hinted at it, taunted me about her other interests. I confronted her, but she denied it. I never thought she'd kill." Poirot's eyes softened. "Your love, it blinded you, but it did not make you guilty." As the interviews concluded, Poirot retreated to the library with Hastings, his expression thoughtful. "The threads, mon ami, they connect not just to Clara, but to the fears of all. Whitmore's payments, Beatrice's silence, Charles's denial, they created the conditions for murder. Grayson's greed wove the web, but Clara's desperation snapped it. He tapped the notebook. Each secret fed the crime, yet only one hand struck the blow. Hastings frowned. So there was no accomplice? Poirot shook his head. Not in the act, but in the silence. Oui. The footprint, the open window, these were Clara's. But the fear that drove her was shared. The manner, it is a mirror of human weakness. The afternoon brought a final gathering in the drawing-room, where Poirot addressed the guests one last time. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice calm but resonant. The crime is solved, the murderer caught, but the lesson remains. Secrets, they are like poison. They fester until they destroy. You each held a piece of Grayson's web, and your silence gave it strength. Let this be a warning. The truth, it must be faced. The guests, subdued, nodded in acknowledgment. Lady Evelyn, her composure fragile, thanked Poirot quietly for sparing her family further shame. Daphne, tearful but relieved, vowed to rebuild her life. Mrs. Langley, her sharp tongue softened, admitted her respect for Poirot's insight. Colonel Blake, his bluster gone, clasped his wife's hand, their bond strengthened by the ordeal. Sir Reginald, though scarred by the scandal, expressed gratitude, his voice heavy with emotion. As evening approached, Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave, their bags packed and the car waiting. In the hall, Poirot paused, glancing at the grand staircase where the glove had been found. The manner, it will heal, mon ami, he said to Hastings, but it will bear the marks of this crime. The truth, it is a heavy burden, but it sets us free. Hastings, moved by his friend's words, nodded. You've done it again, Poirot. You saw what none of us could. Poirot's smile was modest. The little grey cells, they do not rest until order is restored. With a final bow to the manor, they stepped into the car, the Somerset Hills fading into the dusk as they drove toward the station. Blackthorn Manor receded, its secrets exposed, its wounds beginning to mend. The case was closed, but its lessons of trust, betrayal, and the cost of silence would linger, a testament to Poirot's unmatched genius. Chapter 14. The echoes of truth the morning of October 19th, 1925, greeted Blackthorn Manor with a crisp clarity, the autumn sun casting long golden rays across the Somerset Valley. The resolution of Thomas Grayson's murder and the arrest of Clara Beaumont had brought a fragile peace to the household, but the scars of betrayal and deceit lingered, etched into the faces of the guests and the very walls of the manor. Captain Arthur Hastings, packing his suitcase in his guest room, felt a strange mix of relief and disquiet. Hercule Poirot's brilliant unravelling of the case, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's notebook had exposed a web of secrets, yet the echoes of those revelations still reverberated, leaving unanswered questions about the deeper motives and silent complicities. Poirot, standing by the window in the library, his small frame silhouetted against the morning light, sipped his tisane with his usual precision. His waxed moustache gleamed, and his green eyes held a reflective calm, tempered by a faint restlessness. Mon ami, he said to Hastings, his voice soft but resonant. "The case is closed, the murderer caught, yet the echoes of truth remain. The human heart, it is a labyrinth, and even when the crime is solved, its mysteries persist. We must listen to these echoes before we leave." Hastings, folding a shirt, frowned. "You mean there's still something unresolved?" Clara confessed, "and the manuscript was recovered. What more is there?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "The act of murder, oui, it is Clara's, but the why, it is not hers alone. The silence of others, their fears, their secrets, they shaped the path to this crime. We must understand the full tapestry, for the truth, it is never complete without its shadows." Poirot's final task before departing was to tie up the loose threads of motive, particularly those involving the guests who had escaped suspicion, but not complicity. He requested one last gathering in the drawing-room, not to accuse but to illuminate the hidden currents that had enabled Grayson's blackmail and Clara's desperate act. Sir Reginald, though weary, agreed, hoping to restore some semblance of normalcy to his household. Inspector Morris, now a convert to Poirot's methods, attended as an observer, his notebook tucked away, his respect for the Belgian detective evident. The guests assembled, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. Sir Reginald sat at the head, his authority diminished, but his resolve intact. Lady Evelyn, her sapphire necklace glinting, seemed stronger, her confession having lifted a long-held burden. Charles Haverford, still reeling from Clara's betrayal, sat with a hollow gaze, his hands clasped tightly. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his spectacles nervously, while Mrs. Violet Langley's sharp eyes softened with a newfound respect for Poirot. Ernest Whitmore, his fastidious manner strained, avoided eye contact, while Daphne Sinclair, though pale, showed a tentative hope. Colonel Blake, his bluster subdued, sat beside Beatrice, whose quiet strength had emerged through the ordeal. Poirot stood before them, his small frame commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "the murder of Thomas Grayson is solved, the manuscript returned, and justice set in motion. Yet, before I depart, I must speak of the echoes, the unseen forces that allowed this crime to flourish. Each of you held a secret, and in your silence you gave it power." He turned to Lady Evelyn, his tone gentle. "Madam, your past debt, known to Grayson, made you vulnerable. Your fear of exposure kept you silent, yet it was this silence that emboldened him." Lady Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening. "I should have spoken sooner, Monsieur Poirot. I see that now." To Charles, Poirot said, "Monsieur, your gambling debts and your love for Mademoiselle Clara blinded you to her desperation. You suspected her secret, yet you did not act." Charles's voice was hoarse. "I thought I could protect her. I was wrong." Poirot's gaze softened. "Love, it is a powerful force, but it must not blind us to truth." To Ernest Whitmore, Poirot held up the blood-stained handkerchief. "Monsieur, your financial schemes with Grayson, your payments to silence him, they fed his greed. Your fear of ruin made you complicit, though not guilty of murder." Whitmore's face tightened, but he nodded. "I made mistakes, monsieur. I'll face the consequences." To Beatrice Blake, Poirot said, "Madame, your silence about Mademoiselle Clara's presence in the West Wing delayed justice. Your loyalty was admirable, but it cost time. Beatrice's voice trembled. "I didn't want to believe it. I'm sorry." Poirot's smile was kind. "You spoke in the end, madam, and that is enough." To the group, he continued, "Grayson's notebook, his letters, they reveal a man who thrived on others' weaknesses." The word trust, written as he died, was not just an accusation against Clara. It was a judgment on all who trusted him to keep their secrets. The glove, the silk, the perfume, these were Clara's mistakes, but your silence was the soil in which her crime grew. The guests sat in silence, their faces reflecting the weight of his words. Daphne, her voice small, spoke up. "Will we ever be free of this, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's expression was compassionate. "Mademoiselle, the truth sets you free, but it leaves marks. Use those marks to build a better future." As the gathering dispersed, Sir Reginald approached Poirot, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Monsieur, you've given us clarity, though it's painful. The manor will recover thanks to you." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is my duty, monsieur, to bring light to darkness." In the library, Poirot confided in Hastings. "The echoes, mon ami, they remind us that no crime stands alone. Clara struck the blow, but the fears of others paved the way. The lesson is this: secrets, they are chains, and only truth can break them." Hastings nodded, awed by his friend's insight. "You've not only solved the crime, Poirot, you've shown them how to heal." As the afternoon waned, Poirot and Hastings finalized their preparations to leave. The car waited outside, its engine humming softly. Poirot paused in the hall, glancing at the grand staircase where the glove had been found. "Blackthorn Manor. It will stand, but it will remember," he said. "The truth, it is a mirror, harsh but necessary." Hastings, carrying his suitcase, felt a surge of admiration. "You've done it again, Poirot. The manor's free in a way." Poirot's smile was wistful. "Free, oui, but never the same. The little grey cells, they see what the heart hides." With a final nod to the manor, they stepped into the car, the Somerset Hills fading into the distance as they drove toward the station. Blackthorn Manor receded, its secrets laid bare, its wounds beginning to heal. The case was closed, but its echoes of trust betrayed, silence broken, and truth revealed would linger, a testament to Poirot's unparalleled genius. Chapter 15. The Final Farewell. The morning of October 20th, 1925, bathed Blackthorn Manor in a soft golden light, the autumn sun rising over the Somerset Hills with a promise of renewal. The resolution of Thomas Grayson's murder and the arrest of Clara Beaumont had lifted the oppressive shroud that had cloaked the household, but the scars of betrayal, secrecy, and loss remained, etched into the hearts of its inhabitants. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing in the grand hall with his suitcase packed, felt a bittersweet relief. Hercule Poirot's masterful unravelling of the case, the black glove, the cigarette case, the word trust, the lavender perfume, the torn silk, the mysterious key, the blood-stained handkerchief, the threatening letters, and Grayson's notebook had brought justice. Yet the manor's wounds would take time to heal. This final day, as they prepared to depart, was a moment for closure, reflection, and farewell. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit, stood by the staircase where the glove had been found, his waxed moustache gleaming and his green eyes serene. yet tinged with a quiet melancholy. He sipped a final tisane, prepared by the ever-dutiful Mrs. Poole, and surveyed the hall with a thoughtful gaze. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice soft but resonant, "the case is closed, the truth revealed, yet the heart of Blackthorn Manor beats with lessons unlearned. Today we say adieu, but we leave behind a mirror for those who remain." Hastings, adjusting his hat, nodded, his mind replaying the dramatic arc of the investigation. "You've done more than solve a murder, Poirot," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "You've shown them the cost of their silence, the weight of their secrets. But will they change?" Poirot's smile was wistful. "The human heart, it is stubborn, mon ami, but it learns slowly. The truth, it is a seed planted in their souls." Before departing, Poirot requested a final moment with the guests, not to probe further, but to offer a parting reflection. Sir Reginald, his authority tempered by humility, gathered the household in the drawing-room, where the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the sombre faces. Lady Evelyn, her sapphire necklace glinting, sat with a new-found strength, her confession having freed her from years of shame. Charles Haverford, still grappling with Clara's betrayal, stood by the window, his expression a mix of grief and resolve. Dr. Malcolm Reed, his spectacles polished, seemed quieter, his nervous habits subdued. Mrs. Violet Langley, her sharp tongue softened, watched Poirot with respect. Ernest Whitmore, his fastidious demeanour frayed but intact, avoided eye contact, while Daphne Sinclair, her youth tempered by the ordeal, offered a tentative smile. Colonel Rupert Blake and Beatrice, their bond strengthened through shared truth, sat close, their hands touching lightly. Poirot stood before them, his small frame commanding the room with effortless authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "the tragedy of Thomas Grayson's death has been resolved. Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont, driven by fear and desperation, took a life to protect her secret. The manuscript is restored, justice is set in motion, and the secrets of this house are laid bare. Yet I speak to you now, not of guilt, but of responsibility." He paused, his green eyes sweeping the room. "Each of you held a piece of Grayson's web, debts, scandals, silences. Your fear fed his greed, and your silence paved the way for murder. The black glove, the torn silk, the word trust. These were not just clues to a crime, but mirrors of your choices. Mademoiselle Daphne, your silence protected a friend but delayed truth. Madam Lady Evelyn, your hidden debt emboldened Grayson. Monsieur Whitmore, your schemes enriched him. Monsieur Charles, your love blinded you to danger. Madame Beatrice, your hesitation cost time." The guests listened, their faces reflecting the weight of his words. Lady Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "You're right, Monsieur Daudet. Poirot, I should have faced my past long ago." Charles, his voice low, added, "I let my feelings for Clara cloud my judgment. I'll not make that mistake again." Whitmore, his voice tight, said, "My dealings with Grayson were foolish. I'll answer for them." Beatrice, her voice soft, murmured, "I should have spoken sooner. I'll carry that regret." Poirot's expression softened, his tone almost paternal. "The past, it cannot be changed, but the future, it is yours to shape. Let this tragedy teach you the value of truth, The danger of silence. Blackthorn Manor is a place of beauty, but it must also be a place of honesty. You have the power to make it so. Sir Reginald, his voice heavy with gratitude, stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, you've saved us from more than a murderer. You've shown us our flaws, our strengths. We are in your debt. Poirot bowed slightly, his smile modest. It is my duty, monsieur, to bring order to chaos. I wish you peace. As the guests dispersed, Mrs. Poole approached Poirot, her face lined with gratitude. You've done a great service, sir. The manor feels lighter now. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The truth, madame, it is a cleansing force. Guard it well, and do the library. Poirot shared a final moment with Hastings, his expression reflective. The case, mon ami, it is a reminder that no crime exists in isolation. Clara's act was her own, but the silence of others made it possible. The little grey cells, they see not just the crime, but the human heart behind it. Hastings moved, nodded. You've given them a chance to start anew, Poirot. That's no small thing. Poirot's smile was wistful. A chance, oui, but it is theirs to take. The heart, it is a mystery even I cannot fully solve. He glanced at the notebook, now in Inspector Morris's possession, and the letters safely stored. The clues, they told the story, but the lesson, it is for the living. The car arrived, its engine humming softly in the courtyard. Poirot and Hastings stepped outside, the crisp air carrying the scent of damp leaves. The manor loomed behind, them its ivy-clad walls a testament to both its grandeur and its secrets. Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the grand staircase visible through the open door. Blackthorn Manor will stand, mon ami, but it will never forget, nor shall we. Hastings, carrying his suitcase, felt a surge of pride in his friend's genius. You've done it again, Poirot. A case solved, a household changed. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The little grey cells, they do not rest until justice is served. With a final bow to the manor, they climbed into the car, the Somerset Hills fading into the distance as they drove toward the station. As the manor receded, its secrets laid bare, its wounds beginning to heal, Hastings knew the echoes of this case would linger in his memory. Poirot, serene and triumphant, had once again proven that no mystery could withstand the power of his little grey cells. Blackthorn Manor, scarred but resilient, stood as a monument to the truth. And the journey to London marked the end of a chapter, but not the end of Poirot's pursuit of justice.